John's been talking about the last 3.5 billion years, and I'm going to bring things down a bit closer to the present, and then Les is, talking about very localized solutions. It's all linking together. So this is the heat wave that we all experienced 2 years ago, which really brought home just how fast the climate crisis is affecting us. And then 2 months later, these were the floods in Pakistan, described as like an ocean going on and on with no horizon, which is really terrifying. 33 million people, so about half the population of the UK, were made destitute. And that led to this calls for loss and damage. And Antonio Guterres, I'm sure people have seen this, year after year after year, he's been making these impassioned pleas about the climate crisis. And I think, he's appealing to many different groups here, just really trying to bring home how desperate the situation is. I'm sure you've seen these. And the most recent one that I've got here is from September 2023, which was, he's obviously just searching for other ways to describe these horrors. Humanity has opened the gates of hell. And I was looking up this quote and seeing, where he'd said this, and actually it was a talk just before the last COP. And he carried on with this: the future is not fixed, and it is for us to write it. And that's really, what we're talking about here, is writing that better future that gives us a vision of a better world and addresses, at the same time, addresses the climate and nature crisis, and how can we do that, and in the light of the things that John has talked about, how can we reverse these changes? So here I've got these little, well, they're a bit little here, but these drawings by Molly Crabapple, and they're from an animation that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did a few years ago. And if you haven't seen it, it's really great. Have a look. It's called A Message from the Future. And this was soon after she was elected. She was one of the youngest congresswomen to be elected to US and Congress. And she did this little animation of showing herself looking back in 20 years' time at a better future. This was when they were really pushing for a full Green New Deal. And what they're trying to do, and you don't often see it, is actually show what a better life and greener life would look like. So because this was in the US, free healthcare was absolutely central to it, and a better life, valuing teachers, valuing care workers. It included work for everybody, but not work sort of they do now. And then there's this character who goes through and eventually becomes a congressman. So what's been happening is these very traditional establishment bodies have been coming out with these kind of surprising statements. This was just before COP27. Ingela Anderson said, we had our chance to make incremental changes. Now these are the kind of lifestyle changes, that we all maybe used to talk about. And she's saying that time is over. We need a root and branch transformation of our economies and societies. And then this, deliberately chose this picture of the university in Paris called Sciences Po. It's a very old university, and this economist Chancel has been working with many others on this World Inequality Lab, which is open data that anyone can look at. Anyway, one of their conclusions is that reducing global emissions requires integration of social justice into the very design of climate policy. So this is quite surprising, I think, for a conservative economist to start saying we've got to bring social policy in. Certainly not something we ever used to see. This is the last Oxfam report on billionaires. Every year they do a report on billionaires. And what we can see, depressingly, is that the emissions, it takes 4 million people turning vegan to offset the emissions of 1 billionaire. And it's not just because of their high consumption, which I've got over here, you know, their private jets and their SUV and their, I don't think I've got a yacht there, but actually the worst, the 99% of their emissions are their investments. And it just shows how all our, you know, financial and economic systems are so tangled with fossil fuels now. This phrase world building, this term world building that I've got, has come from Olufemi Taiwo, who's he's a thinker, a philosopher, a social theorist, political theorist, and he's a Nigerian American. And despite him having, you know, all that background, he writes really easy, approachable books very clearly. So what he's arguing, and I'm compressing it very much and hope I can do him some justice, is that the world we're in, including our capitalism, has been shaped by 5 centuries of colonialism, transatlantic slavery, extractivism and capitalism. And all of the world, the global north and the global south, is the result of all of those activities. And the distribution, as part of this thing, the distribution of disadvantage globally has become the map of pollution and environmental damage. And that's not just between the global north and the global south, but also within countries and even within London. Last time I was here, I was talking about air pollution, and in London, the worst air pollution is in the areas of disadvantage. Yeah. The poorest people always get, you know, the worst situation. People of colour overrepresented in areas of high air pollution. Another example is location of incinerators, and Greenpeace have done work on this, showing that, you know, incinerators are most likely to be put, you know, in the UK in the poorest areas for lots of reasons, and it doesn't take long to work out what those are. And then, or I'll kind of come back to this, but he's talking about constructivism and how, you know, we rebuild the world. So I said I'd do a whistle-stop tour of some approaches. This is Kate Rayworth with her amazing donut economics. I'm sure lots of people here have heard of this. And it makes so much sense, although she says that when she was a student, you know, that her lecturers were absolutely kind of gobsmacked at this idea, and most of them still can't get their heads around it. But you know, that there are planetary boundaries, and there's a minimal level of social foundation, as she called it there, that we could have both locally, regionally, and globally, and then an upper level of consumption. But what I really want you to say here is these things are happening already. You know, they're not just theoretical, they're actually, people are doing them in the UK and in many other countries, and there's a whole map, and there are locally, there are individuals who've done the training, you know, there's a training you can sign up for, and these are just 3 of the UK councils that are using the principles of donut economics. Another idea which gets a lot of bad press from, you know, certainly our main political parties, and so well of Braveman, is degrowth, which, I mean, I've heard degrowthers say that they've considered changing its name because it doesn't really do it justice. And an alternative is reclaiming the commons. And there's a great podcast with Georgios Kallis, another proponent of this is Hickle, but in some ways similar to Kate Rayworth, what it's talking about is bringing everyone up to, or providing basic services for free or at a very low cost for the community. So it's renationalising or giving a community-based version of things that everyone needs to survive: education, water, housing, common space, and utilities. And the principle is that if those needs are covered or can be covered, you know, in an achievable way, then people don't feel that the need for growth, which John talked about with Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, you know, both going growth. And the growth that's causing not just pollution and destruction, but also this massive inequality that's not lifting people. But the need for that goes away. You don't have to have that growth if you know that you can survive and have a good life. And she talks about this very eloquently, Alice, that what people want when you ask them what they want in life, and this includes Americans, the arch capitalists. We ask people what they want. They want a good school. They want good healthcare. People don't say, oh, I want tons of money. I want a really huge car. Where has it happened? It has actually happened. So in Barcelona, they did this. A bunch of activists, started this movement called In Common, and they did. They were elected, and they did for some years try and do this. Eventually, political pressures kind of have altered it, and they've become one political party among many. But the ideas live on, and Barcelona, in a way, they built on what other people have done in Barcelona and others are doing. But there are also bits of this idea of degrowth now happening around the world. So the last one I'm going to race through is eco-socialism. I've got this watermelon here, which sometimes used as an accusation. Green on the outside, red on the inside. But then, other people have reclaimed it and said, yeah, I am. So there's a few people, now these people haven't necessarily all, as far as I know, used the word eco-socialist, although World Inequality Lab do actually use it. The Green Party, I haven't heard them use it, but I think many of the things that Caroline Lucas says are eco-socialist. Again, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came out of Bernie Sanders' campaign bravely. In America, admitting to being a socialist is considered completely beyond the pale, and the word, communist isn't even spoken. But Bernie Sanders does call himself a socialist, so I suspect AOC is. And bravely, Olufemi Taiwo calls himself an eco-socialist, a pan-Africanist, and a constructivist. A lot of ists, as he said. Coming back to him, he quotes, this is from Marx, who's saying, we're not here to philosophize, the point is to change it. We're not just, this isn't an academic issue, and that's why he has this constructive approach, what Tyler calls a constructive approach. Here he's kind of, I think he refers to this quote from Martin Luther King, where he said, at one point, he said, I fear I'm bringing my people into a house that's burning. And the way that's been interpreted is that, all the ills of capitalism and the inability to look after the poor and support people are kind of getting more and more built into the American system. And he mentions that and says that he feels that America has lost its moral vision. So this constructive approach is saying, it's not enough just to bring more people, bring all different people, lift people up and bring them into our current institutions, people that are excluded. We've got to rebuild those institutions, and we've got to do it for climate and nature reasons and for eradicating poverty and inequality, and those things are closely linked, they're not two separate things. So we've got to start building these new rooms, and that's what these approaches, and I know Les is talking specifically about some of these are. So he gives some examples here, Tyler gives examples of grassroots activism that he sees as being part of this constructive approach. Tenants groups, credit unions, trade unions, media co-ops, what close to my heart, LGBTQI, health collectives, all these things are trying in small ways that we can't overturn capitalism in one generation, and it's a huge thing, but we can do these things which are undermining and creating these new kind of visions. And the other really interesting thing he has, which he says he's brought from his Nigerian heritage, is this being a perspective of a future ancestor. So we here today, the idea is you may not achieve everything you want to achieve in your lifetime, but you do your bit. You know, you're trying to build things, and previous people, we're benefiting from things that previous people have done. You know, our ancestors. I mean, of course, it's acceptable that not everything that your ancestors did, and this includes his, are things that you're proud of and pleased with, but you're trying to be a good future ancestor. And he talks about the history of the making soy sauce, which lasts, to make real soy sauce takes 150 years from planting the cedar trees. But you know, this is like a sign of trust that future generations will pick up where you left off. So that finally, this is one campaign that I am involved with. It's just started. It's very much in that degrowth, you know, paradigm of transport as a public good, not as a commodity. So we're campaigning. We've got very good, strong relationships with the unions, the transport unions, who are really excited about this because they see it as being green jobs for them, you know, many green jobs, expansion of public transport, and we're saying it's for everyone, it's for freedom, giving people freedom of their own city, it's for climate, clearly reducing pollution, and it's creating jobs. And this is what happened when they introduced free public transport in Montpellier. This is from last December, and the people came out to thank the mayor